Hi, this is National Master Dan Heisman, and we're here with another video to help you improve your chess game. In the previous video, we were going over an amateur game, and at one point my mic clipped out. So that was around move 40. So what I think I'm going to do, I'm going to go over the whole game again, and I'm going to give more emphasis starting on move 40. Okay, this was a very instructive amateur game. Let's get the game going. White played e4, as you can see on the screen. Caro-Can, main line, classical, knight takes, knight f6, knight takes. If you take with the e-pawn, like was done in the game, they call that the Tartakower variation. If you take with the g-pawn, they call that the Bronstein-Larsen variation. That's the Lee Chess database there. Black takes with the way the engine says is the better way to take, with the e-pawn. White plays bishop c4, bishop d6, knight f3. Both sides should castle, get their king off the open e-file. White gets the black rook looking at him along the e-file. Bishop e3, making that bishop a big pawn. Now black is fully equalized. Bishop g4 with the pin. h3, keeping the pin on with bishop h5. Bishop e2, normally you don't move a bishop twice to get out of the pin, but the engine said it's as good a move as any. It likes f5 here for black with a slight advantage for black. Black develops the knight. White offers the trade of bishops. Black has a choice of bishop g6 or bishop takes c2. Turns out they're both about equal. Bishop g6, knight c4 hitting the bishop. Now the bishop can go back to f8 or b8 or c7. The advantage of going to b8 is you could put the queen on c7 right away and threaten mate on h2. f8 isn't bad. Black plays bishop c7. He didn't want to block the rook on e8. White puts his rook on the open file, but now there's two bishops in the way. Here, black could play a move like b5 and driving the knight away, followed by knight b6, and maybe queen d6 and knight to d5 with a nice advantage. He plays b5, best move. Knight to d2, knight b6, again, best move. c3, black has a quick and easy development here. And now black threatens checkmate. White has three ways to stop it. He can't move the f pawn because the bishop on e3 would hang. So he has to play either g3, knight f1, or knight f3. Turns out by far the best of those is knight f1. He chooses the worst of the three, g3. And now, as we said in the first video, black makes a terrible quiescence error here. He would love to take this pawn with the queen, but it's guarded by the f-pawn. How can you stop that? You can simply play rook takes e3. If you make those kind of quiescence errors, you're not looking farther because all you have to do is look two moves further. The first one, you get a pawn with check. Then you're going to get another pawn with check. And you're going to get plenty of material here. Black will not only have a mating attack, but it'll be ahead in material. As I said in the first video, you don't have to see very far here. You don't have to look all the way to checkmate to realize you're not giving up anything when you play rook takes e3. You're getting it all back and more right away. So it's actually a pseudo-sacrifice. The other way to find this would be instead of looking at queen takes g3 and saying, how can I get rid of that pawn? It would be to say to yourself, what would I get if I gave up a rook for a bishop? If you just stop there and say rooks are worth more than bishops, that would be a quiescence error. If you then say, suppose he takes with a pawn, is there anything here? The answer, of course, would be yes, 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 yes. Queen takes g3 check, and off we go. So it's actually not that hard. I think most players rated over about 1800 FIDE or USCF would easily find rook takes e3 here. It's not really that hard, and yet we see consistently lower rated players missing this kind of thing. So if you're 12 or 13 or 1400 and wondering how you're going to get to be 1800, pay attention to stuff like this because this makes a big difference. It's not that hard, but avoiding these kind of quiescence errors is really important. All right, so black plays knight d5, which is a good move and should win the game, but not nearly as good as rook takes e3. White's in some big trouble here because black's threatening to take. For instance, if white plays bishop f3, white plays bishop f3, then knight takes, rook takes, pawn takes, and queen takes check anyway, and black's winning. So white's got big problems here. White plays knight f4. Black, of course, takes it. Pawn takes, queen takes, and now knight f3. And now black sees the idea that if he takes the knight, the queen can come in. Turns out the best way to do that is to play bishop e4. Why? Because then the queen can't come over and guard, and that makes a big difference. If you play the other move, bishop h5, which was played in the game, then after queen d3, now bishop takes knight is not correct, because after queen takes queen h2 check, king f1, there's no follow-up for black. So the right move for black is again sacrifice the exchange. Take with the rook. White can't take with the rook because after bishop takes, black wins 2 pieces for the rook and threatens the rook and queen h2 check with mate coming up in a move or two, and that's the end of the ball game. If you don't see that and you just say rooks are worth more than bishops, again, quiescence error. But if you take with the queen, it's a lot more complicated because now taking the knight will get you checkmated on the back rank. So the right move here is to stop the back rank mate with g5. And now the only move to try to save the knight, which is pinned, would be king to g2, and then g4 gives black a massively winning attack. The engine says black is ahead by about 10 pawns here. But it all starts with that exchange sacrifice, rook takes e2. All right, in the game, black quickly sees that he can check with the queen after bishop takes f3, but he doesn't look a move further to realize it doesn't do him any good. White takes with the queen to guard the h1 square and the h3 square, and after queen checks king f1, black's attack has almost completely disappeared, and now black's just up a pawn. And what he should do is bring the queen back and guard his c-pawn and be up a pawn with bishops opposite colors. Instead, black makes a mistake and plays rook to e6, but now white has a sneaky pin. White can play bishop takes b5, and the pawn on c6 is pinned and can't take the bishop because he loses the rook, and also the back rank is very weak. So bishop takes b5 would get black into big trouble. Instead, white misses it and offers the trade. So both sides are missing some fairly easy tactics. These are the kind of tactics you want to study, the kind that will make the difference between being in the low thousands and being in the high thousands. So black trades queens, which is actually a little bit dangerous because the bishop opposite colors will make it much harder for him to take advantage of his extra pawn. And now he doubles rooks, figuring he'll pin the bishop. White goes back and guards the rook so he can move the bishop. And now black has to quickly watch out for all these white pawns on the queen side that the bishop will be hitting. So black should play a move like b4, which looks unsafe. But if white takes the pawn, he can counterattack these other weak pawns, and it turns out he could retain a slight advantage. But that's not easy to see. Instead, he plays h6, which is not a good move. Creates luft on the wrong side. He really wants to bring his king toward the middle. And now white's actually doing quite well. White plays bishop f3. It's even more accurate to play bishop g4. And even though white's down a pawn, he's threatening to win pawns on the queen side. And the engine says at best black can do is just play something like rook to d8 with equality. Instead, black says, oh, okay, I'll let you trade things off. Now white finds bishop g4. Black trades all the rooks, but in this position, white's got skewers of these pawns and they can't be held. So actually, white's the one who should be playing for a win here. Even though black starts a pawn ahead, he's quickly going to lose a pawn or two. Black brings the king toward the king side. He should bring the king toward the middle. The engine says the best move again is something like b4 so he can counterattack the white pawns on the dark squares. White hits the pawn there. A little more accurate to skewer them with bishop to d7. Black plays king g6, bishop takes c6. f5. Black, of course, realizes now that he's in trouble. Bishop takes b5, and now white's the one who's winning. He's got a 4-on-1 majority on the queen side. Black has 4-on-2 on the king side, but black's 4-on-2 does not easily create, connected pass pawns like white has. Black plays g4. Now white should guard the pawn with the bishop. White makes a mistake. He takes the pawn, and now black doesn't have connected pass pawns because the pawn on g4 is not passed. But he does have a protected pass pawn when he pushes it up, and now black's starting to get some counterplay. White, of course, is still winning. Bishop e2 hits the pawn, and the engine says better would be to get these pawns rolling right away. Of course, hitting that pawn doesn't do much. It just forces black to do what he wants to do anyway, which is to bring his king and his pawns up to guard it. White hits it. Black guards it. Finally, white starts to move the king. Black plays his best move, king g5. Now, because black's pawns are further advanced and his king is better, that makes up for the extra lost pawn, and the engine says with best play this should be a draw, but it's very, very easy for either side to lose, as we will see. So white gets the pawn rolling with c4. Now the engine likes g3 check. Black plays the reasonable h4. Pawn takes, of course, keeping connected pawns with pawn takes. And this is where the last video lost the audio. So we'll start to go a little bit slower now. All right, so what should white do? Well, it should be a draw with best play. The engine suggests c5, and as I said in the other video, you have to be careful about what color you want your pawns on. Usually, if you have bishop opposite colors, if these pawns are mobile, you want them on the same color as the bishop so it can't blockade them. If you play a move like d5 and black plays here and white ends up playing here, black's got all these squares guarded, and now white's pawns are going nowhere without the king's help. And meanwhile, the king has to stop the black pawns on the king side, and this would be completely losing. Well, of course, white didn't do that, but he should start with c5. Instead, he brings the king over. Engine says h3 check is the best move here. That's what black plays. King h1. And now king f4 is winning. The king wants to come in and help the pawns come up. King f4 is actually a pretty easy move. It does three things. It gets the king toward the white pawns, it gets the king toward the black pawns, and also gets the king down toward the promoting area where it can help the black pawns. So it not only guards them, but it helps put in front of them. Now it says white can draw with bishop to f1. The idea is that if you ever play g2 check, you can sack the bishop and get the king up just in time. And the pawns are safe, and white is actually on the better side of the draw. But otherwise, black would have to try to guard these pawns, and if he plays h2, then the pawns are easily blockaded. So bishop f1 is the best move. White plays bishop f3, but that doesn't hit the h-pawn, and it gives black the opportunity to win a tempo with king f4. And now black's completely winning. Bishop to b7, let's take all these lines off the board. And here, black plays the best move, king e3. And the threat is king to f2, followed by g2 check. For instance, if white tries to save the pawn, king here. If he pushes the pawn so the bishop can guard, bishop takes, pawn here, check. And it's going to be mate if he moves the king. So, well, he can't move the king. It's going to be mate unless he takes with the bishop, but even after he takes the bishop, it's still mate. So after king to e3, white has only one move, which is king to g1, and he found it. And now the winning move is to play g2, and the unstoppable threat is bishop h2 check, king takes h2, and then king f2. So again, let's say white plays c5, bishop checks, pseudo-sacrifice, king here, and on the next move you're going to get a queen. White can stop you for a move, but then you get the queen, and checkmate. So G2 would be the winning move, and it turns out G2 is the only winning move in this position. I think black had about, I forget how much time he had left, maybe 15 minutes or something, but he relatively quickly took the pawn. He didn't play it instantly, he took some time, but he just couldn't figure out, I don't think he saw that idea of sacrificing the bishop. All right, so after king takes d4, if white finds bishop c8, it's a draw. He wants to force that h-pawn to move up so he can blockade it. These are the kind of positions you need to play really slowly. If you play it too quickly here, like all these moves are obvious, which they're, let's say you say to yourself, oh, he's attacking that pawn. The only way to save it is to play b3, and you quickly play b3. Well, that would lose b3. And again, black could play something like bishop f4, threatening bishop checks. If white tries to get his pawns rolling, bishop checks. Let's say king f1. Everything wins here. The engine says bishop c1, king c3, king c3. White's kind of hopeless against the invasion of the bishop and the king. And the engine says black's up by about 58 pawns here. It sees white that black's getting a queen. All right, so anyway, back to the game. So white plays bishop d5, and now black should say, oh, okay, if I can get my bishop to this diagonal, I'm winning. The idea again is bishop here. Let's say white plays b3, bishop e3 check. If he plays king h1, you could just play bishop to f2. And again, these pawns aren't really going anywhere with the black king nearby. And white's all tied up. We could go through some lines. b4, bishop e3, just waiting. Kind of a Zugzwang situation. b5. Now the engine already says if you check him and he sacks the bishop for the 2 pawns, you're just going to win all the pawns. So check, he has to take it or you get a queen. Takes, takes, takes. King takes c4, a4, king over here, king up, bishop on the long diagonal, king here, keep the bishop on the long diagonal, king here, king takes. This wasn't the best way to play it, but it wins anyway. King here, king here. Nothing he can do. If he pushes the pawn, you take it. If he hits the pawn, you just guard it. If he hits the pawn again, just put him into Zugzwang. King away, king takes. Now we have the right color rook pawn. We have the bishop of that color, and we're going to win. It says mate in 12. All right, so back to the game. Take the arrows off the board. White plays b4. Here, again, bishop e3 check is probably the most accurate. King e3 is a draw if white finds the very accurate bishop e6, though again the idea is hit the h-pawn and make him do something with it before black can check with the bishop. So checking with the bishop was better because we can save this pawn. So white misses it and plays c5. Notice we're going between win and draw, win and draw, win and draw as both sides play inaccurate moves. That's why you have to play these kind of positions very, very slowly. And it's not easy. It's not like, oh, every 1700 player would see this if he takes a couple minutes on every move. It's not easy at all, and you need to really take your time. And if you take your time and you make a mistake, we'll join the crowd. But if you play fast and make a mistake, then you're going to remain low forever because that's just silly play because every move you could see is so critical. Once you see a few endgames like this, you get the feeling that it's critical. So here, black should get out of the way of his bishop, move his king back out of the way to d4 or d3 or even e2. Just get that bishop on e3. He plays g2. And that should win also. Bishop takes g2, doesn't win anymore now that the d-pawn is gone, the white d-pawn. So white plays b5. And now this is where that pseudo-sack wins. Bishop checks. Only legal move is king takes. King here. And after he sacks the bishop for the pawn, the next pawn gets a queen. That's the only winning idea here. Is that true? Well, I guess you could delay it. But I mean, it's the main winning idea, I guess I should say. Not really the only winning idea. All right, so black now has to decide how he wants to play. He loses the threat a little, plays king e2. Still winning with best play. Now he's threatening bishop checks followed by pawn queen, so white has to sacrifice his bishop for the 2 pawns. And now black immediately takes, but actually he should check first. And when the king moves, then take, and that would win him a tempo to win this pawn and make it easier. So here, bishop, even though white just took the pawn and it looks like, oh, you got to take the bishop, the suspicions of bishop e3 check gives you a whole tempo to make it easier to win. You don't need to do that to win, but it's a lot easier to win if you do that. All right, so black takes right away, and white takes, and now the only move that wins is bishop e3. If you have 15 minutes on your clock, you're probably worth taking 10 of them on this move to try to make sure you've got the right sequence. If you just say, oh, I need to get my king over to those pawns, well, eventually that's true, but not every move is equally good here. And you can see from the engine again, only one winning move. Every other move is a draw. And black doesn't find it. I think one of the things you see when I watch intermediate players play these positions is that even when they have a lot of time on their clock, they just play them way, way, way too fast. King f3, the bishop saves itself. Now the white king is all the way up to guarding the pawn, and now it's going to be an easy draw. Too late for black. He could have won that pawn with the bishop checks a couple moves ago. Hits the pawn, white guards it. Black hits it twice. White says, okay, I'll just trade off the pawn for your last pawn, and it'll be a draw. Here, obviously, black cannot push his pawn and keep the pawn on the board. If he does, then white will play b7. Black would have to play bishop here to stop the king. White would play king to b6 and get ready to push this pawn. Black cannot pin it because white would get a queen. Black can try to get his own queen, but too late. Pawn here, king up, pawn here, and white wins. So we can't allow that to happen. So therefore, after b6, black has to give up his last pawn. White takes. Black says, all right, I can see the writing on the wall. He takes with the bishop. He could have also played bishop to h2 and then king up and then sacked the bishop later, but it doesn't make any difference. He knows he's got to give up the bishop for that pawn and then get the pawn and draw. Okay, so this is a follow-up to our previous video, which did not include the audio on the endgame. Apologize for that. I changed the way my plug is going into my microphone, so that's less likely to happen. If you liked the video, hit a like. If you haven't subscribed, do so. But the best thing you can do is tell your friends about the channel. Hopefully this endgame and this game was very instructive, and we will see you next time. Thank you.